Dogmen, werewolves. They're being spotted all over the country, in forests, in cities, in rural areas and towns. There have been reports of them killing livestock and terrifying witnesses. Many report seeing a giant black wolf that stands up on its hind legs with glowing amber eyes and is extremely aggressive. Some claim they are demons and of the supernatural, while others claim they are beasts of the wilderness and not to be trifled with. Tonight, we are going to be looking at 10 different Dogman encounters all across the western United States. If you have an encounter you would like to share with me, or have read on the show, you could leave it in a comment below, or simply send me an email from the email address listed in the description. You can also find a couple shirts and a really cool coffee mug from Teespring listed in the description below. Our merch line will be continuing to expand. Now, let's let the stories begin. Story 1. Dogman on my property. A few years ago, I decided to contact the BFRO about Yetis on my place. I call them Yetis because they have 3 toes instead of 5. I always knew we had more than one cryptid on the place. I live on a river and have about 18 acres or so of land. The Dogman has been sighted off Lime Road, which also borders my river. I am from Pueblo, Colorado, and live on St. Charles River, which dumps into the Arkansas River. My researchers had me put out cams to see if I could catch any Bigfoot activity. I did, and over the years have caught other strange creatures on camera. I call them hybrids. My encounter started when I was 8 years old in 1969, when a huge Bigfoot stood up in front of my dad's tractor, and it has continued to this day with other creatures as well. I have a pic of Dogman I caught in the river. It takes up a span of 4 feet wide. He has huge shoulders and is staring directly at the camera across from it. Yes, it is black, has ears that tip in towards themselves, and scars on its face. And it appears he is not too happy about having his picture taken. I felt very vindicated when I got that picture, and I blew it up in Word so I can get a good look at the creature. Quite ugly to say the least. It is a daylight picture, right about when the sun is setting. Good picture anyway. In the picture, he is not standing, but buffed out squatting, looking at the camera. And that's not all. I keep my big dogs in at night because I don't want them killed. I have an older blue heeler and an Irish wolfhound mix. He's not as big as an Irish wolfhound, but nonetheless is fast and aggressive. I almost lost him last fall, and he was 3 at the time. I came home and he wasn't there to greet me. I found him pretty beat up with a 6-inch slice at his groin, which almost cut into his venal artery. He had no bite marks at all, but he was beat all over his body like something pulverized him. He was so swollen that you could push in on the swelling like you were pushing in on a semi-inflated balloon. I called my pastor neighbor, who indeed said there was a fight in the river at about 9 a.m. She said it sounded horrible and heard a dog screaming. Well, I said it was my dog. It changed my dog's personality. He is more cautious, and when these creatures are around, he will not leave my side, nor will he venture to the river. Irish wolfhounds are ear, sight, and smell dogs. When he stands on his hind legs or raises his head smelling the air and turns around and comes back to me, something is afoot in the river. I have had many instances with these creatures on my place, and I have lost a few good dogs to that river and what runs it. Story 2. It chased my vehicle. 8 years ago, my brother John was heading home from his girlfriend's house off a county road outside of Boulder, 11 miles south of Pinedale, Wyoming. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. when he saw what he said was a huge dog traverse down the slope on the south side of the road and commence to run along the side of his pickup. He was driving a 6970 Ford F-150 Highboy, which came from the factory lifted. The Dogman was running with him at 35 to 40 miles per hour. There is a 2 to 3 foot barrow ditch running along the road, and the Dogman's head was level with his as he was driving, so John puts his height at roughly 7 to 8 feet tall. It was dark in color, with gray or white on its muzzle, running from its nose to under its eyes, which were amber in color. He sped up to 45, and the Dogman kept up with him, often looking inside the pickup. He said that around 50 miles an hour, he lost it, and that's all he would tell me. Story 3. Dogmen in Snohomish. The year was 1997 to 1998. My first encounter happened late at night, while driving home to Snohomish from Sultan, the two towns being about 10 miles apart. I was with my mother, and we had just finished dropping off a friend at her home in Sultan. It was late October, and there was an unusual storm going on that night that everybody talked about the following day. Tremendous cloud-to-cloud lightning and a very cold, dry wind with no rain. Bright flashes of light, loud thunder, and lots of leaves blowing around. After dropping our friend off, we were on a stretch of the road that's very dark, with farmland on either side of Highway 2, and both sides having densely wooded hills. We were driving a 1991 Honda Accord, and at this one particular spot in the road, something caught my eye. Off to the left side, which was a farm field, and there was a break in the guardrail for a dirt road going into the field. Right when we were even to this break, I saw what looked like a huge dog coming up, and right then, it ran in front of our car, and I hit it. We could see the top of its back, which we both swear looked more like a hyena at this point than a dog. It had to be huge to see its back over the hood of the car, when you're sitting pretty low to the ground in a Honda Accord. Its fur was shaggy brown and molded with dark spots, just like a hyena, and its front seemed higher up than its back. The headlights lit it up as it ran in front of our car, and we could feel it get hit, but didn't see it go either up in the air or off to the right side of the car. It was running from left side of the highway to the right. We were driving westward. It sent my car into an uncontrollable swerve back and forth into the oncoming lane, and I just prayed that I could get it under control to keep from getting into a head-on collision with what looked like maybe a Ford Aerostar van. A calmness came over me, and I felt my guardian angel had taken control of the steering, because we had missed the van by just a few inches. After going a little ways further, we were both so shook up that I pulled off to the side. My mother wanted to go look for the dog because we both love animals and felt bad about hitting something. But I had a bad feeling, and looking for this dog, because it had looked so strange, I was afraid of it. It was dark and stormy. It didn't feel safe, and I just wanted to get home. We got back in the car and stopped at a little gas station. When we first got into Monroe, which is the next town between our town and Sultan, we got out to look at the front of my car, thinking surely there would be some evidence of hitting something that large. We were going the highway speed, which is about 60 miles an hour. Like a dent, some fur of blood, but there was nothing there. Not a scratch. The whole thing had a very supernatural feel to it. The look of this dog, which was huge and looked more like a hyena, just didn't seem right. Neither did the timing of it running in front of us, like it wanted to make us stop on that dark stretch of road and get out of my car, which we did, but we got right back in. I never saw it on two legs. It ran on all fours, but there was something so calculated about the way it came up to the highway and looked at our car and ran in front of it. It seemed planned. It was such a strange electromagnetic type of storm that night, too. The next day, people we knew that lived miles and miles apart in many different directions all talked about the storm, and one particularly loud thunderclap that shook everyone's homes. They all thought it was directly over their house, but they were all miles apart. I have 3 more encounters which occurred after this one, and I'm pretty sure this happened October 1997, and no later than 1998. Story 4, Rosco County, Texas. The first encounter happened when I was young and trying to fall asleep. I looked out the window and saw it. Out towards the backyard, faced my window at the time. Nowadays, I sleep in the basement. Back on topic though, my brother and I always felt nervous looking out that window. My bed perfectly faced the window at the time. The beast was 3 feet away looking into it. It had yellow eyes, a long snout of a dog, black fur. Its face is kinda human, subtract the snout and the gnarly long teeth, and fur all over its face. Once it realized I noticed it, it snarled at me quietly through the window, and it was a stare down. I slowly pulled the covers over my head. I then proceeded to cry for what felt like forever. Then I ran into my parents' room crying, telling me it was just a dream. I thought that for what was like 8 years until my sophomore year in high school, when my brother, my friend, and I were out fishing. My brother loved peanut butter at the time, and he brought a plate with a giant serving-sized spoon glob and some Ritz crackers. There's a creek back there. Surprisingly, some decent fish, mostly chub, but there is bullhead, carp, green-bellied sunfish, crayfish, snapping turtles, brown trout, and I think that's really it. We sometimes thought it would be funny to throw the chub there and leave them there at our favorite spot, a giant fallen oak tree which acts like a natural bridge across the creek. It fell, due to the amount of weight it was bearing. My friend and I went downstream one summer's day. Meanwhile, my brother was fishing alone. He went to go take a leak, and he left the food on the other side of the creek. When he came back, he saw it running off with what he described as more of a bigfoot. He ran to us hysterical. We just thought he was crazy, so he started calling him Crazy Joey. After that, I thought of my own run-in with something strange. Later, my friend was busy with lawn work and prepping to move. I was secretly afraid to go out. Joe decided to come back there a month later, and he left by himself. I wish I could have saw him to confirm my story. But the second time around, I believed him for sure. He was catching some fish. His line was all screwed up, and so he took it off his fishing rod and re-spooled it. He had claimed that he had to chase off the same thing that took the food previously. I've seen something else very similar to my own sighting. My brother, my friend, and some others were going to fish at an illegal spot. We didn't know it was illegal, and it turned out to be private property at the time. Whenever me and my friends try out new spots, we have tradition of casting base lures first, and then use normal live bait. I wanted to hesitate because the fish were biting pretty good at the creek, so sure enough, they went ahead of me across the oak towards the quarry. I felt alone after 12 minutes, and then I took my bag, 2 poles, and tackle, and I was changed out close to the log. I started walking and saw what I thought to be a big gray wolf. It made eye contact with me, and we had another stare down. After a little while, I chased it off into the prairie. Story 5, Freestone County, Texas. I was out at my grandparents' house, hunting coyotes as usual, this time of year. It was April. I was hiking through my next-door neighbor's land to get to the wood-covered land at the back. While I was hiking, I got the feeling I was being followed by something to my right. I stopped and switched the red tint on my headlamp to my spotlight, but didn't see anything. Then I switched back to my headlamp and pulled my rifle back up and continued my hike. It was 6:15 a.m., and the sun was just coming up. I was sitting in a hide I'd made the day before. That's when I saw something behind a group of trees on my left. It was crouched. I raised my rifle, looked through my scope, and froze when I saw the creature staring back at me. I panicked and fired a shot off. That's when it stood up and took off, deeper into the woods. I sat there, probably another 25 minutes before I decided it was safe to head in, and did so. Later that day, I grabbed my grandfather and we both went out to where I had seen this creature when it stood up on two legs and took off. We measured where I had seen it, and it was roughly 7.5 to 8 feet tall. To this day, I'm terrified to go out at night or in the early morning hours. Never again. Story 6. Howls in the Canyon. After attending a matter in Austin during the day, I decided to camp out near a local state park in a private ranch that I won't name. The lady there was really nice, and I don't wish her any bad business. It was after dark, about 6:30 p.m. last Friday, November 18th, 2016, when I was invited to explore and set up camp anywhere on the property. I went to the most isolated part in the very back, near a creek. Once in the area, I heard screams made by people, approximately 2 males and 1 or 2 females. At first, I thought to myself, damn, I'm going to have to hear these drunks yell all night as they blast off their primal scream therapy routine. They had set a campfire below next to the creek. I was about 150 yards away, high up near the ledge. The creek ran about 10 yards below me, and I caught a glimpse of their fire, but not of the people. Only quick shadows darted past the flames. It was odd, but I did not think much of it at the time. I proceeded to return to my area where I'd parked my car and gather firewood. I ignored the screams that these folks were making. Yet I noticed that I never once heard talking or voices commenting normal language. Just screams that kept getting more intense, and strong and longer in duration. Still, I did not think of it as being too weird. I kept about my business, trying to set up my camp and my tent in the dark. After struggling, flashlight in my mouth, and knees scraped from laying out the bedding in the tent, I walked around enjoying the open view of the sky. By now, the screams had turned to barking and howling. Earlier during my wood gathering forage, I heard someone walking in the darkness, and I assumed it to be a female person who probably had strayed from the perimeter to go get to the bathroom. I spoke to the person in the dark, mentioning that I would be setting up camp in this upper area away from them. The person never answered, so I felt confident I had established a respectful territorial mark where I would not go near them, and they, in turn, would not come close to me. Nevertheless, I still did not think anything was weird up to that point. What began to worry me was when about an hour later, as I was about to begin my fire and rest in my tent, 3 or 4 howls united into a very loud crescendo. That got my attention. The barking now was more intense and deeper. At first, I thought that maybe these people were using dogs to fight each other, but it was not like that. In dogfights, you can listen to the dogs tearing into each other and the voices of the men cheering on. Here, the barking seemed to be going on in one direction, as if the dogs or coyotes were competing to outdo each other with barks, wailing, and howling. As my mind tried to comprehend what was going on, another possible scenario appeared to my reasoning capability. Maybe they had set up speakers and were playing a recording of barks and howls. But it made no sense. Once again, the barking deepened and the howling became more fierce and louder. That's when I decided that I would not be able to sleep there at all. Besides, the sounds did not appear to be human-based from what I could tell. I collapsed the tent I had struggled to set up for almost an hour and left the stone ring and all the firewood of different lengths and thicknesses stacked and ready. A sense of self-preservation came over me as I was alone, unarmed except for a long, heavy machete I gripped with my right hand. Before leaving, I crept as far as I could to the ledge where earlier I had seen their campfire, but the barking and howling was too great. I crept up quietly in the defensive combat mode only 25 yards further. How I wished to have my tape recorder box with batteries so that my wife could hear what I was hearing. Like I said, I could not go any deeper or closer to them because the things voicing out the barking and howls were not people. I never saw them, and I don't think I ever do. Story 7. It attacked my neighbor's dog. On April 4th of 2018, I came back from work around midnight. Like most nights, I sat down on my back porch and lit a cigarette and relaxed. However, unlike most nights, I heard something new. I am used to coyotes and my neighbor's dogs barking, but in this case, I heard something new. It sounded like a deep howl, but instead of the usual dog sound, it stayed as one tone, and it was octaves deeper. I heard it go from backyard to backyard, and the neighbor's dogs took notice. The dog's barking triggered one of my dogs to run out to the fence line, and she began to bark at something unseen. I got up and told her, "Hey, come back in, girl, it's okay." She turned to me, and she sat there, utterly frozen in fear. It took a few moments to break her out of this, and she bolted to the back door. I decided to poke my head out of the gate and look into the field behind the fence. By the tree line, I saw these amber-colored eyes standing about 5 feet above the ground. I decided to run in and took up my knife and ran out in the direction of the eyes. The whole time I walked, I heard the howls. However, when I got close to where I initially saw these eyes, every sound stops. You could literally hear a pin drop. Where I didn't see anything, I felt the presence of something watching me. Some sort of alpha predator that I didn't know about. After a few moments, I walked back to the porch and sat and had another smoke. It was then that the howl started again. This time, though, they came from my neighbor's backyard. They have 2 shepherds, and I will never forget this sound. I first heard this guttural growl noise unlike anything I've heard before. Then one of the shepherds shrieked, and then I heard the other get slammed against the fence. One thing led to another, and I heard my neighbor fire off a round, and then I heard this thing trail off. The next encounter was just 3 nights ago. I heard the howl start up again, but this time I heard it making its way through the tree line behind the back lot of my house. I heard the thumping of its feet, and branches were snapping. My instincts kicked in to get cover, so I shut off the back porch light and allowed my eyes to get adjusted. There was enough light to clearly see the opening in the tree line. That's about 2 of me wide and about 9+ feet tall. I watched in the direction where the noises were coming from, and all of a sudden, I see it stand up. I first saw the ears, tall and sharp like knives. I then saw its head, followed by its broad shoulders and long arms. It stood there watching me for what seemed like forever, until it turned and ducked down a little, and took massive strides on 2 legs to walk off. It's because of this I've been conducting an investigation on this thing. I learned there was an encounter in Freestone County, not very far from me. I hope to get reasonable evidence to show you all soon. Story 8. We saw it in the window. April 1999. For some background info, I was raised in the deserts, southeast of New Mexico, on 2 different ranches, so I am very well versed in the flora and fauna of our beautiful state. I even used to track semi-professionally for hunters and our local trappers. I know the critters around this state. We always lived on a very remote ranch, 50, sometimes 75 miles from the nearest actual town. My senior year of high school, I moved out on my own, being a part of the DECA program, to live closer to my job and school. This is where my story starts in April of '99. My boyfriend and I were rooming with a couple in a trailer house just outside of Lakewood, New Mexico. We rented a room from them and sometimes watched their 2 kids as part of our rental agreement. For a few weeks that April, a lot of the neighboring landowners had been complaining about wild dogs coming up from the river and harassing their dogs and scaring their livestock. One guy had even reported some structural damage to one of his chicken coops. The couple we lived with had 2 dogs, both of them medium-sized terrier mixes, and neither one of them were of the cowardly side. They had been getting very skittish about going outside at night, though. So much so that we had to make sure to let them out right at sunset, and again at sunrise, because they would not leave the trailer house otherwise at night. One Saturday night, at about 11 p.m., near the end of the month, the 4 of us were sitting around, watching TV and just basically talking about stuff, when the dogs started growling and barking at the window on the south wall of the bedroom. This was really unusual behavior for them, so we all got up to see what they were on about. By the time we got there, the dogs had shifted their barking away from the window and seemed to be barking at the wall and along the wall, like they could smell something there, but it was moving. It was very strange, and when they came up to the end of the room, their barking just went crazy. Suddenly, from farther down the wall, at the same time, we all heard this loud thump and scuffling sound. It was powerful enough that we actually felt it. The dogs at this point just completely lost it. They cried out a high-pitched whine and just dove under the bed. We all ran out of the bedroom, down the hall, and into the kitchen to see what the hell was up. Peering out of the kitchen window was pointless, as it was late. There was cloud covering, and the moon wasn't even out. We heard the scuffling noise again from further down the house, and went into the living room to see what was up. We were all really confused at this point. The next few moments seemed to happen in slow motion. Appearing in the living room window from left and looking right in on us from the glass was, I don't know what. From the shoulders up, what I can only describe as a man dog. Its shoulders were quite human, with short, sleek hair, but it had the head of what looked to be a Rottweiler. And the teeth, oh my god, the teeth on this thing. All 4 of us screamed at about the same time, and I guess that scared it off, because it just disappeared. That image is forever seared into my head. Also of this note, this was a trailer house, so the bottom of that window was easily 6 feet off the ground, meaning this thing was 7 foot something. No matter how big of a dog or wolf it was, it could not have stood up and looked at us like that in the window. The guys immediately grabbed their shotguns and headed out the door, even though I told them it was a bad idea. I guess they were out there looking for it for some 20 minutes before they came back inside and said they couldn't see anything. The light from the house shining in on it, being so close to the window, were the only reasons we saw it in the first place. None of us really slept well that night. It just felt creepy. The next morning, I got up early and decided to go have a look around the house to see if there were any tracks to identify what the hell it was. The grass and weeds that were right beside the house pretty much hid any tracks it made there, although I did find where it looked as if something had clawed at the siding along the bottom of the house in a couple of places, making the thump and scuffling sounds the night before. I then decided to follow the tracks the guys had made, and that was when I made a second, very unnerving discovery. The guys made clear tracks in the sandy dirt, and whatever it was out there did as well, because it was pretty much circling them the entire time they were out there, at a distance of about 40 feet. The tracks were huge canine and switched back and forth from 4 tracks to 2, meaning it was walking bipedally for at least half the time it circled them. Just freaking creepy. Story 9. The Werewolf of Mineral County, Nevada. I grew up in a town called Hawthorne, located in Nevada. Hawthorne is located right next to Walker Lake. The main highway leading from Hawthorne to Reno is Highway 95, which, if you use Google Earth, you can see runs right between Walker Lake and a mountain range. This creates a small area of highway that is affectionately known to the locals as the Cliffs. When I was 14, my grandparents, Mom, and I were coming home late from a long day of doctor's appointments in Reno. My grandfather was driving, and we hit the Cliffs a little after 11:30 p.m. I was in the passenger seat to help keep my grandfather awake, but I still think it was just so I would sing folk songs with him. Anyway, about a third of the way around the cliffs, heading toward Hawthorne, there is a small area where the road pulls away from the mountain and creates a small alcove area. As we started to come up on it, we saw a large animal crossing the road, dragging another animal in its mouth, and it stopped in this alcove. Grandpa thought at first that I might get my first look at a live mountain lion, so he slowed down. When we got within 100 feet of it, he turned on the brights of the car. To our surprise, it was no mountain lion. We only had a couple of seconds to look at it after Grandpa turned on the brights, because right after the light hit whatever the hell that thing was, it turned to look at us 1 second, and the next it leapt straight up on the side of the mountain and out of sight, leaving the mangled body of a fox. Grandpa hit the gas, and the old Buick we were in jumped, waking up the woman in the back seat. I had never seen my grandfather truly scared before, but even he was physically shaking afterwards. I remember the sheer bulk of the thing, and the fact that it looked like a really large bodybuilder, when it jumped in the same fashion as a human, with its arms reaching up toward the rocks almost over its head. It had long, thick fur, but you could see the muscle definition. I don't remember the facial features, but I remember the pure terror when that thing turned and looked at the car with shining yellow eyes. I even pissed myself. I have come practically face to face with a polar bear, and I wasn't as scared as when we saw this thing. Now, I don't believe in werewolves, and I haven't seen anything like it since, but I never want to see that thing again. Story 10. Dogmen in Nebraska. October 5th, 2016. My brother and I were waiting for our bus at our usual corner stop. It's about 3 blocks away from our house, and there's a pretty densely wooded creek near 1 to 2 blocks behind our bus stop. The first thing I noticed that was off was that my brother was standing completely rigid, staring intently down the long road. I shook him a little bit and asked what he was looking at. He shushed me almost immediately. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a large black shape darting on 2 legs across the street to the line of houses on the other side before disappearing. Thankfully, our bus arrived soon afterward, so we got out of there. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories, and don't forget, if you like my content, subscribe and keep a lookout, as I am constantly releasing new and scary encounters with creatures of all kinds.